Protests over the jailing of a Spanish rapper turned violent in Barcelona over the weekend after a brief respite in the city. A police van was torched and looting broke out as protesters fought with police. Several thousands of them had gathered for a peaceful march before groups spun off and engaged in acts of vandalism. Spain's been hit by widespread freedom of speech demonstrations over the last 2 weeks. It's all since the arrest of Pablo Hasél for glorifying terrorism and slandering the monarchy. Well, joining us now is Manu Terradios, editor of our Spanish service, to find out more. Manu, thank you very much. You know, we had a little bit of a pause in the protests, but over the weekend they've definitely come back with violence. What would it take for the protesters to stand down?
Buenos días. Good morning, Rosie. Well, short term, and regarding Pablo Hasél, I think it's difficult to see a new measure. For example, members of the cabinet have been very clear in the sense that the law is the law. He's in prison mainly for glorifying terrorism, which is a very sensitive issue in Spain, and because he's got a criminal code. So this is factual, we cannot do anything. And seeing that it's a very sensitive issue, I would rule out any measure as an indult or something like this. But then we have to see who is protesting right now, because there has been a big evolution in these 2 weeks, starting from people obviously concerned about freedom of speech, members of pro-independence movement, anti-system. Right now, the protest has turned more into something slightly different, even if Pablo Hasél's arrest was the trigger. It's people, especially young people, who are protesting against the current situation. If you see those who are 30 or younger, they've been through in Spain 2 different crises: the financial crisis 2008, 2009, this new crisis coming with the pandemic. So it would be more about them to stop protesting. What can we see? Well, maybe if we see some measures, economic measures from the government, maybe lifting some restrictions, that they could see a brighter future, at least slightly brighter than they will have now. They will maybe think it twice about going against to the streets, but still, it's more about what's going to happen with the Spanish future rather than being focused on Pablo Hasél right now.
But the government have promised repeatedly that they would reform the laws surrounding freedom of speech. Does it look like that might happen anytime soon?
Well, the moment it's obviously stuck, first of all, because of the pandemic. Everything has slowed down, not only in Spain, everywhere. But also we have to speak to say that it's a very complicated reform. In terms of freedom of speech, they all agree, the government, the current coalition, that, for example, glorifying terrorism should not be punished with prison, can be softer. But once again, it's a very sensitive issue, so they have to see how they reform it. But this reform will be wider. They will also touch, for example, slandering the crown, but not only the crown, anything related to religion, institutions, especially Unidas Podemos wants to change it. And it can go even further, because they want to turn into a crime glorifying Franco and Franquism, which for the moment it isn't. And on top of that, we can add also that they want to reform the crimes of sedition, rebellion, about which we've been speaking hundreds of times, related to the pro-independence politicians, separatist leaders who are in prison. So it's a very complicated issue, and although there is will to do it in the government, they have to reach some agreements, and even if they tackle it soon, it will be some time for everybody to agree how to reform the code that is touching, as I've said, different topics.
Manu, thank you very much.
Always a pleasure.